Hello and welcome back to the Palace Way podcast. There's been a change of scene. I've finally moved into my new place, and that came at quite a good time as I was able to travel down to see us beat Millwall, albeit on penalties. But today I'm joined on the podcast by Bobby Manzi. Bobby, how you doing?
I'm not bad. I'm glad I'm not in your mold infested place, as you called it on Tracer. Uh,
The mold has now been dealt with. Our Russian handyman came round, and he sorted it. And it's all otherwise good, I think, now. There's one other issue that I'm forgetting about.
did you
Uh,
contact the landlord or did you just do it of your own accord?
Contacted the landlord. Oh yes, we have mice. We have
Oh,
mice now.
oh wow,
Um,
what a start to life in South London.
well, it's kind of relentless. We've bought some mouse traps, and we'll see what else needs to be done. But it seems like they're living in our boiler cupboard. But yes, Crystal Palace Football Club, that's what we're all here to talk about.
Yeah, not your mites.
West Ham, what a win. Um, Delightful. What more is there to say?
Yeah, I think the performance maybe wasn't spectacular. I thought defensively Palace were really solid, bar a 15-minute spell where West Ham did get on top. They obviously scored, and then the spell that followed that. I just thought it was a little bit uninspiring going forwards. If it wasn't for a Tyreek Mitchell wonder goal, then really and truly Palace would be walking away with a point. And yes, the goal did, it kind of come from nothing. It was a great finish. But other than that, Palace have been quite dry in attack leading up to that moment. I would say the goal probably come against the run of play slightly. And after that, then Palace did prod on and they were dominant again as they were in the first half. But I just thought the performance itself, if you want to be critical, lacked a bit of quality in the final third. I think, especially when Yeremy Pino was subbed off and you bring Justin Devenny off on, and you've got Justin Devenny and Daichi Kamada as your two tens. I would say it's quite underwhelming and uninspiring. And it's quite a tough watch. It was quite laborious at times. And I'm not saying Justin Devenny and Daichi Kamada are poor players, far from it. I just don't think they are the attacking tens. I think you need a little bit more pace there. And a player who can take someone on and get past someone. And that's just not what these two players do. But focus on the positives. A very good win. The undefeated streak remains. And then it's on to Liverpool next weekend. And, the two teams who are left undefeated in the Premier League battle it out at Selhurst Park. It's something to look forward to. And on the whole, I would say it was a positive display despite the few negatives in attack.
Yeah, I think we learned probably quite a bit from it because we saw Chris Richards put in a very, very good performance at the back, in addition to Lacroix and Gay as always. But the way Richards is kind of, I think, settling into his peak now is really, really exciting. And I don't even know if that's it, right? Because he's still quite young, but he's been a revelation this season, back end of last season. Um, I think. We got to see Tyreek Mitchell score a screamer, which was rather fulfilling. I reposted something on Twitter that said that's the first time I've screamed at a Palace goal at home in a while, and I'm not ashamed to admit that was the case for me.
My reaction was quite similar in the press box, actually. I was just shocked. I just went, it wasn't a scream, it wasn't outrageous, but it was just a bit like an oh. I was just unbelievable. I just couldn't believe it. It was such a great finish from someone who has been, let's face it, not great in front of goal. But to do that with his weak foot and the composure he showed in that moment to put it in the top corner, was impeccable. And I do think it's worth pointing out actually that Tyreek has massively improved this season, not only because, he's not playing with an injury, he's had a good rest this summer and he's got backup, so he doesn't have to play 90 minutes every week, unlike Daniel Munoz on the other side. But also, I just think his composure in the final third has massively improved. His crossing ability, he's started to show that more. I think his deliveries have been a lot better. I think he's not been as scared to take players on. And I would say that the goal is probably a product of that. Yes, it's unlikely he's going to score a goal like that ever again in his career. But I just think that he's much more controlled in the final third now. And that's been a real positive at the start of the season. And I totally agree with you on Chris Richards as well. I think that he was my man of the match. At the first 10, 15 minutes, I thought he looked a little bit shaky. There was a couple of balls in the air that he misjudged. But after that, he was just so calm and collected in the back line. And every ball he won. It was the one rare occasion we saw Maxence Lacroix actually get beaten in behind, and he couldn't recover with pace. And Chris Richards just come in and recovered the ball straight away. And I was really impressed with Chris. I think since Trevor Chalobah's loan was cancelled last season, he has just massively stepped up. And probably put in performances that maybe we were unaware he could do because when he was coming in off the bench, or as cover at centre back, I thought he was really disappointing. But then he got 3 or 4 games under his belt, and my word, he's just been so consistent since then.
I think, just regular game time can be such a incredible thing for players, and we'll get on to what that could mean for players like Romain Esse a bit later on. But just to sort of finish up on Tyreek Mitchell, I completely agree. He's I think gotten a lot better in those sort of 1v1 situations out wide where he can either check back and pass inside or skip past someone. I don't think he had the skip past in seasons gone by. I'm yet to really feel convinced by his crossing, but I think he
Was it the ball for the Mateta chance? Was it against Millwall when he put in that great drilled ball, and Mateta had the shot, and then it bounced out for the rebound, which Pino couldn't put away.
against that was what against Sunderland rather.
Yeah, well, it was in a recent game. I can't remember what game it was, but I was just like, that was brilliant from Tyre. The confidence he showed to get past the player and then drill that ball in. It was impressive, and I think we've seen that a couple of times this season now, whereby he's got more confidence in those positions.
Yeah, for sure. I think, if we're looking at players who have improved as well, I think Justin Devenny's another one to talk about. Someone who's, come basically from obscurity from a sort of Palace fan point of view. No one really thought he was, well, not your everyday fan didn't think he was gonna, break into the first team a year ago. And he's been very good. Won us the cup at Wembley, and scored another fantastic penalty against Millwall, but also keeps getting brought on either as a 10 or as an 8. He's either, being asked to fill in the Sar role or something more natural for him next to Wharton or Hughes. I've been getting quite frustrated by it because I felt like our 15 minutes of struggle against West Ham were quite heavily correlated to the time where he was playing centre mid before any other changes have been made because of Pino's injury. And it's something that Glasner keeps doing that baffles me when you've got players like Uche on the bench. So why persist with Devaney at 10? Is there something I'm not seeing?
Well, it comes down to trust at the end of the day. I think Geisner has got his players, and I think we've seen that perhaps across his entire career, and certainly in his spell at Palace. He's got that that core of players that he really trusts and always calls upon. And newer players probably haven't earned his trust yet. So where maybe Uche, you would have think he was the natural replacement for Pino in that second half. He's just gone, actually, I know what Justin's about and I know he'll work hard for me. And Uche just hasn't quite adjusted to the Premier League just yet. He's going down for fouls too early is something that Glasner criticised him for after the Millwall game, not picking the right moment to go down for those fouls. Equally, he's just not been entirely convinced by him yet, and it's just going to take a while for him to adjust to England. So maybe he thought 45 minutes against West Ham was just the wrong time to bring him on. I am speculating slightly, but just from reading between the lines from what Glasner has said, it kind of felt like that, and that Justin is a player he trusts, a bit like Daichi, even last season when he was pretty poor, to say the least. He still always got his minutes because Glasner, for whatever reason, had his trust in him.
Yeah.
So I do think it comes down to that. But overall, I think it's a really unambitious substitution, which is probably something you wouldn't characterize Oliver Glasner with. You think he's a really ambitious manager from everything he's achieved at the football club already. But that I did find that substitution quite frustrating in the moment. I was watching it and I was just like, you're essentially allowing West Ham to bring the game to you because you've got nothing in attack to drive you forwards. And I totally agree that Uche was the man to bring on then, just to try and have a bit more flair in attack. Um, Oliver needs to kind of move away from this because I think it will start to cost Palace games in the long run. I think Daichi has been exceptional in the eight alongside Adam or Will whenever he's playing. I just think he's been top class. He's massively adjusted to English football now, and that is absolutely his position. He's great on the ball in there, and he's a good footballer. He's not a footballer who will drive you forward, but he's a nice technical player. He's got a good passing range, and I think that's really crucial for those positions. And it's the same with Justin Devenny, a good technical footballer, but not someone who's going to beat a man. I just think moving forward, you have to play attacking players who can beat a man in the 10. And I think this is where Palace could fall short this season, in the sense that when you lose Sarr to AFCON, or maybe there's an injury, or you lose Uche to AFCON, you're in a position where you actually are going to be forced to play Justin and Daichi in the tens because of the lack of depth in those forward areas. Maybe where you didn't sign Manor Solomon on deadline day. I'm not saying he was the answer as such, and there's problematic. It's a problematic signing with the fan base. However, you just needed that extra attacking number to prevent situations where you would be bringing on Daichi and Justin Devenny in those positions. And I think Palace have fouled there, and ultimately it could be their undoing come December, January time when they're being forced to play them there pretty regularly.
Yeah, and similarly, I think if Uche or another attacker gets signed earlier in the window and Glasner has chance to trust them or let them adapt to Premier League football before the West Ham game, it's probably not Justin Devenny who gets brought on in that situation. So it just comes back to that issue of how we handled our transfer window, and I think a lot of people will be satisfied with with the numbers and players on paper, and I am too to a degree. But I do think we'll need to act very swiftly in January to avoid looking very, very thin in the forward positions because, one injury, you've got Sara and Uche in AFCON, and, you're looking at Romain Esse and Pino if Pino's, like it's iffy. And let's talk about Pino because obviously he has a knee injury, which he's getting a scan for. I've tried to talk to people who might have a better idea than me about this kind of thing, and they don't seem particularly worried that it's going to be something akin to a serious injury um, at Villarreal where he did his ACL a couple of years ago. But as is the case when you need a scan on your knee, it's concerning. But look, he walked off the pitch, so I'm hoping it's not super severe.
Yeah, no, it was always tough in the moment to kind of tell what was wrong with him as such. Oliver obviously then said in the post-match press conference that it was a knee injury and that we would likely have a scan on Sunday. I'm yet to find anything out from that scan yet, or whether it even happened. So I will work on that and see if I can find something out. But yeah, I would say it's not overly concerning considering he walked off the pitch, but it wasn't entirely unassisted, which I would always say is a slight concern. And he did look like he was in a lot of pain and a lot of trouble when he was walking off. And he was down for quite a while receiving treatment after that final whistle at halftime. So let's just see how it pans out. I would say it's probably unlikely we'd see him for the Liverpool game, considering he's going to require a scan and maybe missed a couple of days of training. But let's just see what we can find out.
I mean, to a point, I'm quite optimistic about Yeremy Pino solely because he was in pain, and a lot of the time when players feel pain, that means it's not something as bad as an ACL tear because that can cause numbness, and it's more sort of the devastation of knowing what that means that you kind of hear and see in their reaction. So, I'm obviously by no means a sports scientist or physiotherapist or doctor, but I've spoken to a couple of people who are, and they don't seem, massively concerned.
I also think if it was as serious as an ACL or an MCL, that Glasner probably would have let on a bit more. I mean, he didn't say much when asked about it in his press conference, but if it was more, if it was looked severe, and yeah, I know you require scans and things, but if it looked severe and felt severe, I think he would have said that. Whereas he just said he was feeling pain in his knee and couldn't continue for the second half. So I wouldn't be too concerned. Maybe a few weeks out, but let's just see what we can find out and see how the next couple of days pan out.
And in his absence, we saw the return of Eddie Nketiah off the bench, sort of filling in maybe left of the on the left 10, maybe next to Mateta, depending on whether we were in possession or not. But I thought he looked quite good. I thought he held up the ball really well, showed pace, which was impressive given he hasn't really had a full pre-season at all and missed a couple of months of football. And yeah, I mean, if he plays like that, I mean, God, I've always really rated him. I've always felt like that first season didn't show who Eddie Nketiah is. And like if we can get him back in the rhythm, I think he'll be a very useful player for us.
I agree. I thought it was a really self-assured performance from Eddie Nketiah, which is awfully impressive when you consider the fact he didn't have any pre-season really, a couple of days and then another injury. And also the fact that he's a couple of months ahead of schedule on his return. So to put in that performance with very little training and to be so confident in himself and not being scared of losing the ball or taking a player on, not in his natural position. A lot of the time he played in that kind of 10 area where we saw last season, early days when he joined and he come into the starting 11 that he really struggled in. So I was really impressed with Eddie, and I think it was always going to be a big season for him with Palace in Europe, and meaning he would get more minutes. And ultimately, the start of the season didn't pan out how he would have expected. You know, he probably would have expected to have over 180 minutes under his belt by now. Instead, he's been on the recovery in the recovery room at the training ground. So I'm just very pleased for him that he managed to come on and look so confident. Moving forward, it's got to be, getting those minutes up to maybe half an hour, and then maybe, like seeing if you can get half of a stint somewhere, and maybe target those cup games coming up. You've got, another round in the League Cup. You've got European games. I just think in Europe, the season will be crucial for Eddie, and I think he can be, take that workload off Mateta slightly because we've seen him struggle in recent weeks, having to play 90 minutes every single game. So yeah, if we can reduce Jean-Philippe Mateta's workload and raise the confidence of Eddie Nketiah, I don't think he had an awful season last season. The performances at times didn't feel great, but if you actually look at some of the goals he scored, especially in that FA Cup run, they were number one, very good finishes, and number two, very important to Crystal Palace going on to win the FA Cup. And it's just if they can manage his workload and help manage Mateta's workload, I think you can get two really nice performing strikers in the squad, especially at times as well. I know the smaller guy doesn't necessarily, I can't get my words out, suit Glasner. However, I think he could suit Palace in Europe at times if you can just get the ball into his feet and he can get it out and finish. And I just, yeah, I look forward to seeing more of Eddie Nketiah this season, is probably what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think the only reason Nketiah gets judged so harshly is because of the transfer fee and where he came from. And I think to a point that is fair, but I would argue it's a criticism that should be levied at the club rather than at Nketiah himself, who, you know, is a South London boy, has been crucial to us winning our first ever trophy, and is without a doubt a very good backup for Mateta, and I think will actually probably compete with him to some degree this season. I'm quite confident in saying that.
I also think you can make that transfer fee point about anyone. It's like Harry Maguire couldn't help. He was the world's most expensive centre half when he moved to Manchester United.
Yeah.
But it's the expectation of transfer fees, and those criticism, as you rightfully say, should be levied at the club rather than the player, because the player should be the one getting the support, regardless of whether they're, a 25 million pound player or a
Mm.
Daichi Kamada on a free transfer. Everyone should be getting the same support from the fans, and yeah, the criticism for the amount of money spent on players should certainly be levied elsewhere because it just adds extra pressure onto them. And for a player who's probably already low on confidence, it's just not helpful.
And if we're talking about players who are low on confidence, who should probably have more support from fans and also from manager, someone who is an attacker, let's talk about Romain Esse, who played against his former club Millwall, whose fans were quite scathing about him, between chanting what a waste of money and what was it, 12 million, you're having a laugh, and so on and so forth. He was hooked at half time, and then
Equally, though, the same fans that are begging for him to come back on loan in January. So
of course, but that, they Romain Esse did not have a very good performance at all. He lost the ball a lot. Glasson was, quite upset visibly with his display. He was subbed off at half-time for Uche at Millwall and then dropped entirely from our Premier League squad for the first time this season against West Ham. So, it's quite scathing, as were Glasner's comments about him in the press after the game, which I think were maybe a little bit reserved as well, but he was also happy to, criticize the amount of money he's on and relative to the work he needs to put in, and basically saying he's not up to scratch, which is quite a, you know, heavy thing for a 19, 20-year-old to be told after they've gotten a Premier League move.
yeah, S is a tough one, right? Because we can all see that he's not up to the Premier League at the moment. Yes, he's probably got the talent to make him, um, get that gap and become a Premier League footballer. However, at the moment, he's just not it. And when you're dealing with a perfectionist like Oliver Glasner, ultimately you have to perform. So this is where the tricky nature of it comes in because you can totally understand why Oliver is frustrated and will not use him until he shows that he can compete at that level because he is a top manager and he's not going to take risks on losing games of football on a 20-year-old if they're not up to the standard of the Premier League. But equally, you have to feel sorry for Romain Esse because he's only had 6 months of senior football at Millwall. So quite frankly, he wasn't ready for Crystal Palace. He wasn't ready for the Premier League. He wasn't ready for the high standards of Oliver Glasner. those 6 months at Millwall, yes, he looked good, but he's not had enough minutes under his belt. If you look at Eberechi Eze, he joined Crystal Palace as a 21-year-old, 22-year-old. He'd played a lot more football at that level. Michael come in a bit younger and he struggled in his early phases at Palace. And you kind of see that there, but with a manager like Roy and a manager like Patrick Vieira, you can kind of get away with it a bit because they're different managers and they will give the young players creative license to do whatever they like and just go out there and get a goal. And almost under a Roy, you think Romain Esse would be a lot better because he just takes the shackles off in attack. It's all very rigid defensively, but when you go, and you just give your young players the creative license to go out there and try and score a goal. Oliver's different. Oliver, you have to do a hell of a lot of work off the ball. You have to not make any mistakes. You have to do the right things at the right moment. And right now, Romain is in a situation where he's not doing that. He's doing skills when he shouldn't be doing skills. He's being too risky with the ball in positions where he shouldn't be risky with the ball. His positioning has been poor. So all of these things are totting up against his name, and he's doing it in training as well. Oliver said a couple of weeks ago in a press conference that he does two wow actions in training, but then he does eight things that we don't think he should be doing. And this is why I'm so reluctant to use him, almost in that kind of vein. So he's not doing what is expected of him. However, where Oliver has fallen below the standard, I think it's absolutely fine to pull him off at half time. I think it's absolutely fine to not use him in the squad. I think it's fine to not be bringing him on. I think those three things are acceptable. What I don't think is acceptable is when you use him and then he makes a mistake, you rip your jacket off and you throw it to the ground. I think for a player already low on confidence, it's borderline unacceptable because you're just going to batter their confidence even lower. I think what else is pretty poor is some of the language he has used talking about him in press conferences. So I don't like the fact he's spoken about his wages and he doesn't know what a hard life is because he's not making decisions about life and death like a doctor or nurse. Because everything's relative, right? Something that might seem pretty small to everyone in normal life. So Roman Esse not playing Premier League football and earning a lot of money, you have to look at that from his perspective, which is all he knows is playing football. His life is playing football. His work is playing football. And quite frankly, he's not being afforded the opportunities to go out there and show himself. And when he is going out there and show himself, he's not doing it at a good enough level and he's then getting battered for it. So everything's relative. Yes, of course, in the grand scheme of things, earning a lot of money and being a Premier League footballer is great, but you don't frankly know the mental toll that's having on him not playing football. So I think those comments from Glasner were misguided, and I also just think his harshness towards him. I feel from what I have understood of Romain, I think he's a player who needs a bit of an arm around the shoulder, and he needs a bit of love, and I just think the tough love approach doesn't work for him.
And
And
he'll
I
get
think,
whiplash. He'll get
yeah,
whiplash if
I
Glasner
think we're
tries it
seeing
now.
too much from Oliver, just pounding him. And it might be very different on the training ground. It might be very different in the dressing room. That's something we don't really know. But from what we're seeing publicly and the harshness of his comments, it just seems a little bit too far.
Yeah, I think, it's we spoke about him not being in the right positions. Glasner's formation is really, really weird in terms of where it sort of aligns with how British Academy kids are taught to play and how most Academy kids are taught to play. You don't have people who fit into the left or right 10 role very often. And we've seen
Mm.
that in our academy, right? We've had players who just cannot get their head around the system. And I think that applies. We've seen that with Esse, we've seen that with Jezrin Raksaki, both of whom have been, to some degree, isolated by Glasner or almost treated by Glasner. And they sort of are the same profile of a touchline winger, skillful, coming through the academy system recently, whether that be in Millwall or Palace or in Jez's case previously Chelsea. But like, there needs to be some degree of affordability of mistakes from the manager. And I know that it's Premier League football, but Esse's just simply not being given the support that I'd want to see someone I look up to as much as Oliver Glasner give him. Because, I've played a lot of football. I know what it's like to be struggling and to want a manager to get on your side and back you. And it's night and day because the decisions you make when you're trying to prove someone wrong versus when you're just playing your football are so different. And you've got Esse being overly risky with the ball. Why do you think he's doing that? Sure, so part of it's in his
Trying to
DNA.
prove
It's the type
himself.
of player he is, but it's also I want to prove him wrong. I want to show him that I can do it, keep the ball, and score a goal with it. And that's what it's that in his head that will be leading him to make wrong decisions. Some of it will be naivety. Some of it will be who he is as a player, not meshing with the system. But a lot of it will also be a kind of indignant subconscious to try and prove Glasner wrong. And that's probably going to be frustrating for Glasner. It's going
There's
to be
also,
really frustrating for SA and for fans.
there's a lot of pressure on him as well. It's like whenever he plays, he's got to prove himself.
Yeah.
Glasman said that he needs to come and show that he can help the team win games, and then it's a big opportunity for him, and it's a big chance for him to do that. So immediately you're putting pressure on his performance rather than just letting it be organic and seeing what he can do. And I just think it's a lot to handle for a young lad. He's 20 now. He joined the club as a teenager, scored on debut, and then didn't really get a look in after that. He's had very, very limited chances. I think that's just hard, especially when he's come from, albeit it was only a 6 month spell, but come from playing regularly at Millwall. I think there's something to be said about him and his agents that maybe it was the wrong decision to make a Premier League move at that age. And yes, they're all going to earn a lot of money from it. And he's coming in, big wages for a young player, taking a step up. So on paper, it does look like a good move.
But you've got to
But
look at the relationships behind that
but
deal as
but
well.
ultimately, I just think there is a duty of care from the agents to maybe his family as well, to say to him that, do we think you're ready for that move yet? Or could you do with another year at Millwall and carry on playing football? Or do we need to try and pressure the club that you're going to find you a loan to make sure you're still playing football? I just think there was a failing on all parts, and there's slight desperation from Palace as well. The fact they needed an attacker and that Romain Dougie viewed as his next big thing, and so obviously you're going to do that and you're going to move for that. But I just don't think the move quite married up all over the place, or married up in every dot, every I was, or, I just don't think it was the perfect move. Is what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say, and I think we're starting to see that now. And maybe people around him should have said, Romain, let's think about this. Let's wait till the summer when there's going to be more options on the table. 6 more months at Millwall and see where you're at.
Unfortunately, agents aren't particularly known for being patient and not taking the money when it comes up. And, if you're looking at SA, maybe a loan is the solution for him. Like maybe he does need those minutes, but also Palace need the players in their squad. So it's definitely a difficult situation.
Well, you can't loan out França, Esse, and
Yeah,
Rak without having any other attackers. I know there's the argument that have Rak-Saki and França ever been options? No, they haven't because they've not been around. But equally, the squad is short on attackers, and you can't have three attackers out on loan. So they either need to sign someone in January, whether it's a loan or not, and then move him out on loan,
yeah,
or look at other options, whether it's bringing another player up from the academy or something like that. But you still have the same issues. Maybe bringing Mateus back if he stays fit.
yeah.
I'm not sure what the exact answer is, but I just don't think it's feasible having Romain Esse at Crystal Palace for the rest of the season. I think he needs to go somewhere and get games, because also what I would say about his performance against Millwall is that chances for him will be few and far between now. Whereas if he would have put a good performance in against Millwall, you could have seen him coming in for those Conference League games and taking a bit of a bigger role for the season.
Yeah.
But he's just not up to the level yet, and I think it's gonna
Yeah.
see him struggle to get minutes under Oliver Glasner.
I do think at the end of the day, though, he is a victim of the Palaceness, which is our inability to replace Michael Elise at the time in the first window. So we were sort of panicking and tried to sign a Palace DNA type of player at to replace him in January, which was a bit rushed because there weren't many options on the market. And we didn't surround him. We didn't have a plan for him quite clearly because it's not worked out, and Glasner's not the right manager for who he is at the moment. So, it's going to take time, and I think you're right. Maybe it is a loan that gets him the game time and opportunities, and hopefully the confidence that he needs. I think if we're just going to revert to positives towards the end of the podcast, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention JD Cumbo, who was my man of the match on Tuesday against Millwall, because on a debut in English football against an aggressive team based off how they bullied Pino and how they bullied Esse, he was pretty fantastic. I mean, on the ball, he was really, really confident. He looked assured. He was not afraid to venture forward and play passes or skip past someone. And defensively, he was very good as well. I think someone, it might have been you, was saying he's quite Aaron Wan-Bissaka-esque.
Wasn't me.
It wasn't you? Well, someone was
No.
saying he was quite Aaron Wan-Bissaka-esque in terms of his tackling. I wouldn't go that far, but I thought his decision making was really, really good with the exception of that one shot, which he was tempted to hit from 30 yards from the crowd saying shoot. But I thought it was a very confident performance, and he brought a lot of what I was expecting from him, having watched a bit of him in France and a bit of him for the French under 21s. He brought that to a championship opposition when players of presumed higher quality couldn't. And obviously we've been raving about Chris Richards, and he plays in the position we expect Cambo to fill in at. But we also saw Richards play left centre back in that Millwall game, and he looked quite good there too. So maybe you've got something there with Cambo, Lacroix, and Richards. If Gay's the one that's going to leave, and you sign someone else for the future behind them, if Mofi Jemede is not the one, so on and so forth.
I think it's real shrewd business from Palace signing a 19-year-old centre back from Toulouse and JD Cambo. He's one for the future. I think he's pretty highly rated. He's had some bigger clubs than Palace after him in the transfer market. So really good business to get that one over the line. I wouldn't set any expectations for him yet because, as Glasner has said, he got dumped on the floor by Mateta in one of his first training sessions. He looks good, strong, confident, good on the ball, but equally he's got a lot to learn and not quite ready yet. But I think he's good depth. I think he's a nice player to have signed and certainly one for the future. And it's good to see Palace planning forward in that fashion. It's probably something they've been guilty of not doing too well is the fact that, when a player leaves, you should have had their replacement there for a couple of years now, and a younger player learning the craft, learning the system, learning the club, and then ready to step up. And then you sign that younger player again because you've got a more mature player coming in, and the cycle should work like that. And I think although Palace proclaim to have this model, I don't think they've done it very well. And JD Campbell is a step in the right direction. So yeah, really talented young lad. Been very highly rated at young international level, or youth international level. Done well for Toulouse last season. The Premier League is a massive step up from the French league. Let's not understate that. But it'd be good to see him get some minutes in these Conference League matches. Learn the trade, learn the craft, as it were. And yeah, I just think there's very good business for Palace in the transfer window, and let's see how he goes.
Yeah, and he's still very much young, right? He's 18, 19. But I think he's a player that I know you just said no expectations for him, but he feels like the kind of signing that could be a very good one for us. And obviously only time will tell, but it just had that feeling about it. I feel similarly about Uche. I think Uche has excited me a lot in the games he's played against Sunderland and Millwall. I thought he looked very confident. So, I think there are a lot of positives there. And Walter Benitez as well, having made his debut against Millwall, saving two penalties. So whatever Dean Henderson can do, he too can also do. So
Probably said something about the Millwall game actually that JD Campbell was the player who completed the most passes, and maybe how not stagnant it was in attack. It's just
there's no familiarity there though. Like without Sarr, without Esse, you've kind of exhausted Mateta. There's no linking there. And you've got Esse subbed off at half time. Uche came on and was by far our best attacker that game. And he was fine. I thought he was quite exciting to be honest. Like there was a moment where he skipped in between two of them, and I think only a player of his power or a player of Eze's sort of agility could do something like that. And he is also surprisingly nimble for a man that size. Which I honestly couldn't believe how large he was in person. Um, but I think I'm very excited to see more of him. Very excited to see more of Cambo
yeah.
and uh, and Benitez as well. If he's going to now be trusted to play in the Conference League now that it's league rather than knockout.
Well, let's just hope he's fit in time for the game because it was kind of they were saying he would be back for the Kiev game after dislocating his finger. So
Mm.
hopefully he does stay on track with that, and maybe we see him start. I think Palace. It'd be interesting how they manage the goalkeepers this season. Whether they, because Dean's made no secret about the fact he wants to play in Europe. So it'd just be interesting to see whether, they split it and maybe whoever doesn't play in Europe plays the following league game on the Sunday, or whether Walter does just play in Europe. Or, interesting. I think it's very good that Walter saved two penalties. I thought in the game itself as well, he looked pretty. cool. I was quite impressed with him, whether it was how he's reading the game, or just he seemed a really strong unit in goal, which I quite liked. Two really good penalty saves, and he's shown that he's up to the level, which I don't think is a surprise considering he played in the Champions League last season. Let's just hope he gets some chances and maybe he gets 10, 15 games under his belt this season.
Yeah, I think he probably is good enough to get that for sure. And it's, you've got Matt Turner last year who played the early games in the cup rounds.
Yeah.
Well, now we've got someone who can maybe play a little bit more. I think you're right. I'd like to see him play Premier League games where Dean's played the preceding Conference League game. And I think that would be really good for us
Because
just
it's a
to,
lot as well. You've got two international goalkeepers, and it's something that Gazza alluded to. You've got two international goalkeepers who are always travelling, and then they've got the extra travelling in the league. So although the goalkeeper role isn't as exhausting physically, they still have the same mental strain as everyone else, and they do need a rest here and there. And I think it's good that you've got a goalkeeper this season, whereby Matt Turner last year probably wasn't good enough to play deep into competitions. So I think it's good that you've got enough competition there now and enough quality, whereby if you change the goalkeepers, you're not too scared of levels really dropping too much. I mean, Dean's been absolutely phenomenal and will continue to be phenomenal. But it's just nice to have another option there, especially if he gets injured, which I know over the last 18 months we've not seen as much, but certainly earlier in his career, he's picked those injuries up. He had a long stint out at Manchester United, made the move to Palace, had another long stint out. So it's just good to have quality backup now because last season it looked really precarious with Remy and Matt Turner as your two backups.
yeah. I think that's pretty much everything we wanted to talk about on this week's episode, and we'll be back very soon to talk about Liverpool, the two undefeated teams going head to head at Selhurst Park. Title charge is on. Maybe not after the game, but let's hope it continues.
I
Um,
do. It's worth mentioning that I do genuinely believe Palace can finish in the top six this season. It will be how they manage playing Thursday, Sunday, and whether Europe then does become a massive distraction as the season go on. I think AFCON, obviously with Sarr and Uche losing those two attacking options, could be really problematic. But we are looking at a team who are so sturdy defensively. It's the old adage, isn't it, about defenses or attacks win you game, defenses win you titles. Palace are so good defensively that they're not going to lose many games of football. I don't think anyway. And it's then just looking at whether they can turn those draws into wins. Last season Palace were pretty good. They had that 8 game stretch at the start of the season whereby they didn't win a game. But then after that, it was top seven form all season long. Whereas this season, Palace have started extraordinarily well, one of the two best teams in the Premier League thus far. And they played three of last season's top seven. By next weekend, it'll be four of last season's top seven. So they've got on paper easier games. And I know Palace don't normally make the easier games easy, but they've got those games coming forward. And I just think they're in a real good position now to actually finish probably their best ever finish in the Premier League table with their best ever manager and one of their best ever squads. So I think it is a really, really exciting season.
let's just hope we can keep as much of them fit and together for as long as possible. Thank you for listening slash watching to this episode of the Palace Way podcast. Sort of flipping into corporate outro mode there. I see Bobby sort of laughing at me, but yeah, thanks for listening. We'll be back soon, and we'll see you then.